When we talk about anger, most of the time what we are really talking about is perception. Think about the last time someone bothered you. Was it their action alone that made you upset, or was it your interpretation of that action? When someone cuts you off in traffic, you may feel like they disrespected you. When a colleague interrupts you, you may feel dismissed. When a loved one ignores a text, you may feel unimportant. But here is the deeper truth: none of these actions actually define you. They only reveal something about the other person, their impatience, their lack of courtesy, their distraction. Those are their realities. The mistake we make is turning those realities into a mirror that reflects something about ourselves, when in fact they do not. Psychology teaches us that anger is often the byproduct of personalization. We absorb someone else's behavior as if it were a direct commentary on our worth. If someone doesn't smile at us, we assume they dislike us. If someone criticizes us, we assume it's because we're not good enough. And when we interpret other people's choices this way, we hand over our emotional well-being to forces completely outside of our control. Imagine how exhausting that is, constantly letting other people decide how you feel about yourself, your day, your life. It is no wonder so many of us walk around carrying irritation like a weight on our shoulders. But the key to freedom is a shift in perception. Once you realize that people's actions reflect who they are, not who you are, you gain a kind of shield that prevents anger from even taking root. The rude driver doesn't define you as unworthy of respect. They reveal themselves to be impatient or reckless. The dismissive coworker doesn't prove that your voice is meaningless. They prove that they are too absorbed in themselves to listen. The partner who is distracted doesn't prove you lack value. They prove that their attention is scattered. In every case, their actions are a window into their own inner world, not a judgment of yours. Philosophers have been saying this for centuries. The Stoics, for instance, constantly reminded themselves that the behavior of others is outside of their control and therefore outside of their responsibility. Marcus Aurelius wrote that when people offend us, it is because they are acting from ignorance or weakness, and we have the choice to let their ignorance remain theirs, not ours. This perspective is not about excusing bad behavior, but about refusing to be poisoned by it. You do not need to drink the venom that someone else has chosen to create. In practice, this means adopting a posture of observation rather than absorption. Instead of thinking, "They disrespected me," you think, "They are choosing to act disrespectfully." Instead of asking, "Why are they treating me this way?" you ask, "What does this say about where they are mentally or emotionally?" This small but profound shift places you back in control of your peace. It prevents the automatic fusion of their action with your identity. And when your identity remains intact, anger has no fertile ground to grow in. Consider also how liberating this mindset is in relationships. If your partner forgets something important, you can see it not as evidence that they don't care, but as evidence that they are human, perhaps overwhelmed, perhaps distracted. If a friend cancels plans, instead of feeling rejected, you can see it as a reflection of their own circumstances, not your value. If a stranger lashes out at you, you can understand it as an overflow of their frustration, not a verdict on your character. By separating yourself from their behavior, you are no longer chained to every mood, mistake, or misstep of others. You remain steady while the world around you shifts. Of course, this is easier said than done. Our egos are sensitive, and we are wired to want acceptance, validation, and respect. That wiring can make it feel almost natural to take things personally. But here is the paradox: the more personally we take things, the more fragile we become. The less personally we take things, the stronger and freer we are. It is a discipline, a practice of reminding yourself daily, "This is about them, not me." And with enough repetition, this truth begins to harden into instinct. The beauty of this perception shift is that it not only reduces anger, but also increases empathy. When you stop personalizing others' actions, you begin to see them as struggling human beings rather than as enemies or threats. The person who insults you might be projecting their own insecurity. The person who ignores you might be drowning in their own anxiety. The person who criticizes you might be carrying years of unprocessed pain. This doesn't mean you excuse or allow mistreatment. It means you don't waste your energy resenting them because you recognize their behavior is a reflection of their inner battles, not of your worth. Think of the alternative. Imagine living your entire life constantly bothered by everyone around you. Every sharp word, every dismissive gesture, every failure to recognize your value. You would spend more time angry than at peace, more time reactive than reflective, more time living in someone else's shadow than in your own light. But once you internalize that their behavior is about them, you step into a kind of sovereignty. You no longer hand out pieces of your peace to whoever happens to cross your path. You hold on to it, protect it, and let others carry their own weight. At the end of the day, the question you need to ask yourself is simple. Do I want my emotional life to be controlled by every person I meet, or do I want to be the master of my own peace? If the answer is the latter, then you must remember that people's actions are not mirrors, they are windows, and you get to choose whether to look through them with judgment and anger, or with understanding and detachment. So the next time someone tries to provoke you, the next time someone disregards you, the next time someone's words sting, stop and remind yourself this is about them, not me. And in that moment, you reclaim your strength. You take back the authority over your emotional life. And you step closer to the kind of calm that cannot be shaken, no matter who you encounter. That is the beginning of never feeling angry or bothered by anyone. If perception is the first step in dissolving anger, then mastery of response is the second. You see, it's not enough to simply remind yourself that people's actions reflect them and not you. That insight gives you clarity, but clarity alone does not prevent you from reacting in the heat of the moment. When someone says something offensive, your body still tenses. When someone cuts you off, your heart still jumps. When someone dismisses your ideas, your pride still stirs. This is natural. It's the human nervous system doing what it's wired to do, react. But the difference between living as a prisoner of those reactions and living with freedom is whether or not you create space between what happens to you and what you choose to do next. Psychologists often talk about the gap between stimulus and response. A stimulus is the trigger someone's words, a gesture, an action. The response is what you do with it. For most people, that gap is nearly invisible. The trigger fires, and immediately the reaction follows. Someone insults you, you snap back. Someone ignores you, you sulk. Someone challenges you, you defend yourself. This automatic chain keeps you locked in cycles of anger and irritation because you're not choosing, you're simply reacting. But here is the secret: there is always a gap, no matter how small, and within that gap lies the power to decide who you are going to be. Consider this for a moment. When a stranger insults you in passing, you could erupt in rage, or you could smile and walk away. The insult is the same, but the outcome is entirely different depending on how you use the gap. When a coworker interrupts you, you could lash out, or you could calmly reclaim your voice. When a loved one forgets to meet your expectation, you could argue, or you could choose patience. Each of these choices requires that you slow down the chain reaction and insert awareness between what you feel and how you act. That is the essence of emotional detachment, not coldness, not apathy, but the refusal to let your immediate emotions dictate your behavior. Philosophy backs this up as well. The Stoics argued that events themselves are neutral. It is our judgment that gives them meaning. Epictetus famously said, "It is not things that disturb us, but our opinions about things." When you grasp this truth, you realize that anger is not a direct product of someone else's behavior, but of your interpretation and your reaction. By training yourself to pause, to breathe, to reflect, you transform that split second of judgment into a moment of choice. And in that choice, you discover your freedom. Now, let's be honest, pausing is hard. Our instincts are fast and our pride is sensitive. That's why this is a discipline, not a one-time decision. You have to practice it in small ways every day. When you're waiting in line and someone cuts ahead, can you pause before reacting? When you get an email that feels condescending, can you step back before typing a sharp reply? When your child or partner irritates you, can you hold silence for a breath before letting words spill out? Each of these moments is training. Each pause lengthens the gap, and the longer the gap becomes, the more power you have over your responses. What happens over time is profound. Instead of living on emotional autopilot, you begin to live with intentionality. People notice it too. They see that you don't get rattled easily, that you carry yourself with calm even in situations that make others lose control. This doesn't just earn respect, it creates an aura of strength. Because true strength isn't about domination, it's about composure. The person who cannot control their reaction is weak, no matter how loud or aggressive they seem. The person who can absorb provocation without losing themselves, that person holds real power. There's also a practical benefit to mastering this pause better outcomes. When you react out of anger, you often worsen the situation. Arguments escalate, conflicts deepen, relationships fray. But when you respond instead of react, you create space for resolution, for understanding, for growth. Instead of pouring fuel on the fire, you allow it to burn out. This doesn't mean you never assert yourself. It means when you do, it's intentional, not impulsive. Your words carry more weight because they're measured, not triggered. To make this real, think about a leader you respect, whether in history, business, or even your own life. Chances are, part of what made them stand out was their ability to stay calm under pressure. Great leaders don't panic when things go wrong. They steady the room. They don't react to every slight or criticism. They choose their battles. They embody self-control in a way that commands attention. This is what you gain when you master response. You become the leader of yourself. But I want to be clear, detachment is not suppression. It's not about burying your feelings or pretending you don't care. That approach only breeds resentment. Detachment is about acknowledgement without enslavement. You can feel the irritation, the disappointment, the sting of disrespect, but you don't let those feelings take the wheel. You see them, you breathe through them, and you choose your path deliberately. It's like standing on a riverbank watching the current flow. You notice the rush of water, but you don't get swept away by it. And here is where philosophy and psychology converge. Both teach that mastery of response is ultimately mastery of self. You cannot control others. You cannot stop people from being rude, careless, or unfair. But you can control what happens within your own mind. You can train it to pause, to detach, to respond with dignity instead of reflex. That is a power no one can take from you unless you hand it over. So when someone provokes you, remember this: there is always a gap. It might be just a fraction of a second, but it's there. And in that gap lies your freedom. Will you let anger control you, or will you rise above it? Will you react blindly, or will you respond with intention? The choice is always yours. And that choice is where peace begins. If perception shapes the way you see others, and detachment gives you control over how you respond, then the next layer is the foundation of self-worth. Because the truth is, no matter how much you understand and no matter how much you practice pausing, if you do not have a secure sense of who you are, you will always be vulnerable to the opinions, behaviors, and judgments of others. Anger often rises from insecurity. When someone questions your value, when someone criticizes your choices, When someone mocks or dismisses you, it only penetrates deeply if you already doubt yourself. But when your worth is anchored firmly within you, external attacks lose their sting. Think about a tree. A tree with shallow roots can be toppled by a strong gust of wind. But a tree with deep roots, spread wide and firm, can withstand storms without breaking. In the same way, your identity is your root system. If it is shallow, every insult, every rejection, every moment of disrespect shakes you. But if it is deep, grounded in principles, values, and truths about yourself that no one can take away, you stand tall even in the middle of chaos. The reason so many people get angry is that they unconsciously look to others for validation. They want people to approve of them, to recognize them, to confirm their worth. But this is a dangerous dependency because people are inconsistent. One day they'll praise you, the next day they'll criticize you. One day they'll admire you, the next they'll ignore you. If your sense of self rises and falls with their opinions, you will live in constant emotional turbulence. But when your self-worth is internalized, you free yourself from this instability. You realize, I know who I am, I know what I stand for, and no one else has the authority to define that. This isn't arrogance. This isn't pride. It's security. It's the calm assurance that your identity is not up for negotiation. A person who is arrogant lashes out at criticism because their ego is fragile. A person who is secure listens to criticism with curiosity, but is not shaken by it. They can distinguish between useful feedback and empty noise because their value isn't hanging in the balance. That is the difference between living with constant anger and living with peace. Psychologically, we know that low self-esteem is one of the greatest predictors of anger and resentment. People who don't feel good about themselves tend to interpret the actions of others as personal attacks. If someone disagrees with them, they feel invalidated. If someone doesn't include them, they feel unworthy. If someone criticizes them, they feel diminished. Their identity is fragile, and so they defend it with anger. But when your self-esteem is healthy, you don't need to defend yourself against every slight. You don't need to prove your worth in every interaction. You don't need to fight for recognition because you already recognize yourself. Philosophers across time understood this principle too. Socrates, for example, said that the unexamined life is not worth living. Why? Because without self-knowledge, you become vulnerable to the shifting winds of society. You become defined by what others say instead of what you truly are. To examine yourself is to know yourself, to know your strengths, your weaknesses, your values, your purpose. And when you know yourself deeply, no one else's words can rob you of that foundation. Let's make this practical. Imagine someone calls you incompetent. If you secretly doubt your abilities, that word will ignite anger. You'll feel attacked, exposed, defensive. But if you know your skills, if you've tested yourself, if you're grounded in confidence, their word bounces off. You might even laugh at it, or you might consider it calmly, as their truth here I can learn from. Either way, it doesn't destabilize you. Why? Because your worth isn't hanging on their approval, it's anchored within. Or consider when someone ignores you. If your sense of worth is tied to attention, their silence will wound you. But if you're secure, you understand that your value doesn't decrease just because someone fails to recognize it. Their blindness does not erase your brilliance. Their neglect does not cancel your significance. It only reveals their limitation. And with that understanding, anger has no place to grow. This is why building inner self-worth is not just self-help advice, it's the foundation of emotional freedom. Without it, every interaction can destabilize you. With it, nothing can control you. You become unbothered not because the world is kind, but because your identity is unshakable. Now, how do you build this kind of worth? Through discipline, reflection, and practice. You remind yourself daily of your values, your principles, your non-negotiables. You separate your worth from your achievements or failures, from praise or criticism, from attention or neglect. You learn to say, I am valuable not because others say so, but because I live by truths that I refuse to abandon. This takes work. It requires you to challenge old patterns of seeking approval and to replace them with internal certainty. But once you begin, you feel the difference immediately. And here's the paradox: you actually become easier to be around. People are drawn to those who don't demand validation from them. When you're secure, you don't cling to others for recognition. You don't lash out when they fail you. You don't suffocate relationships with constant demands. Instead, you bring calm, strength, and stability into every interaction. That stability doesn't just protect you, it elevates everyone around you. At the same time, this self-worth does not mean you tolerate mistreatment. In fact, it makes you stronger in setting boundaries. Because when you know your worth, you don't let people treat you as less. You don't need to yell or rage. You simply refuse to engage in dynamics that dishonor you. Your calm no is more powerful than 1,000 angry outbursts, because it comes from strength, not from woundedness. When you live with this kind of rooted identity, anger becomes rare. Not because people suddenly become perfect, but because you are no longer shaken by their imperfection. Their words, their actions, their neglect, it all passes through the filter of your self-assurance. And instead of feeling insulted or diminished, you stand unbothered, anchored free. So the question you must ask yourself is this: where does my worth come from? If it comes from the shifting opinions of others, you will always live in anger. But if it comes from within, if it comes from the values and truths you refuse to compromise, then no one can touch it. And when no one can touch your worth, no one can disturb your peace. If perception teaches you not to take things personally, and emotional detachment gives you mastery over your reactions, and self-worth anchors you so that you are unshaken, then the next natural step is to cultivate empathy and perspective. Because the truth is, even if you understand all the psychology and philosophy of anger, you are still living in a world full of people who will disappoint, offend, and irritate you. You can't control that. What you can control is how you interpret them, how you choose to see them, and when you begin to see people not as enemies, but as human beings wrestling with their own pain, ignorance, and limitations, anger dissolves and something far more powerful takes its place: understanding. Think about the last time someone hurt you with words or actions. Your instinct may have been to strike back, to prove them wrong, to carry the weight of resentment. But what if instead of judgment, you chose curiosity? What if instead of asking, why did they do this to me, you asked, what must be going on inside of them that led them here? That single shift reframes the entire experience. Suddenly, their behavior is not a direct attack on your worth, but a window into their inner struggle. You see the frustration behind their sharp words, the insecurity behind their arrogance, the loneliness behind their neglect. When you see the humanity in others, even in their flaws, you weaken anger's hold on you. This is not to excuse cruelty or dismiss responsibility. It is not about letting people walk over you. Empathy is not weakness. It is clarity. It gives you the ability to step outside of your own wounded ego and view the situation from a wider lens. Psychology confirms this. Studies consistently show that people who practice empathy experience less stress, less hostility, and greater resilience. Why? Because they are not stuck in a cycle of self-centered interpretation. They don't live in the narrative that everything is about me. Instead, they recognize that people are often projecting their own struggles onto the world. That recognition creates room for patience, for compassion, and for peace. Philosophy echoes this as well. The Stoics, who we've drawn from already, were not just concerned with self-mastery, they were concerned with perspective. They encouraged the practice of imagining life from another person's point of view. of asking yourself why some might behave as they do. This wasn't to condone harm, but to liberate oneself from the chains of bitterness. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself, when you wake in the morning, you will meet people who are meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They act this way because they do not know good from evil. In other words, people often act out of ignorance or pain, not out of deliberate malice. Seeing that truth prevents unnecessary anger. Now let's make this practical. Imagine a coworker interrupts you constantly. It's easy to assume they're disrespectful, even malicious. But step into empathy for a moment. Perhaps they grew up in an environment where interrupting was the only way to be heard. Perhaps they are insecure about being ignored, so they overcompensate by dominating conversations. Does that excuse their behavior? No. But it does prevent you from taking it personally. You can address it calmly, with clarity, without being consumed by anger. Or think about a loved one who withdraws emotionally. The first interpretation might be, they don't care about me. But with perspective, you might see that they are overwhelmed, carrying private burdens, or struggling with fears they don't know how to voice. Again, empathy doesn't mean tolerating neglect forever, but it does mean your response comes from understanding rather than rage. You can say, I see you're struggling, let's talk about it, instead of attacking them for failing to meet your expectations. Even with strangers, this mindset transforms you. The rude cashier, the impatient driver, the cold stranger on the street, all of them are carrying invisible weights. Maybe they're exhausted, maybe they've lost someone, maybe they've been treated poorly all day. You don't know. But what you do know is that their behavior is not about you. Empathy releases you from the illusion that you are the target of everyone's flaws. And once you stop believing that, you stop being bothered. Now, some people fear that too much empathy makes you vulnerable, that if you always try to understand others, you'll never stand up for yourself. But the opposite is true. Empathy strengthens you because it takes away the emotional bait. When someone tries to provoke you and you respond with perspective, you deny them control over your mood. You may still set boundaries, you may still walk away, you may still say enough. But you do it from a place of calm strength, not reactive anger. And calm strength always carries more authority than explosive rage. In fact, empathy often disarms conflict altogether. When you meet hostility with hostility, the cycle escalates. But when you meet hostility with calm understanding, you interrupt the cycle. People are not used to being understood, they are used to being judged. So when you see past their surface and speak to their deeper humanity, you often change the dynamic completely. That doesn't mean every person will suddenly treat you better. Some won't. But it does mean you won't carry the poison of their negativity within yourself. This is where empathy intersects with freedom. Freedom from anger isn't about suppressing emotion, it's about transforming the way you see others. It's about realizing that everyone is fighting battles you cannot see. It's about refusing to make their battles your burden, and it's about choosing, over and over, to replace judgment with understanding. There's also a profound dignity in this approach. Anyone can get angry, it takes no wisdom to lash out, but to see past offense into the complexity of another human being, that is rare, that is noble, that is what lifts you above the noise of daily irritation. You become the person who refuses to be dragged down by smallness, who sees further, who lives with deeper awareness. And here's the paradox again, when you stop being consumed by anger toward others, you actually start influencing them more. Your calmness unsettles them. Your refusal to take offense disarms them. Your empathy makes them rethink themselves. In other words, by not being bothered, you sometimes change the very behavior that once bothered you. So the next time you are tempted to react with anger, pause and ask, what story might explain this behavior? What unseen battle might this person be fighting? Even if you never learn the answer, the act of asking dissolves much of your resentment because it shifts the focus away from your wounded pride and toward the shared reality of human struggle. And when you choose empathy over anger, you are no longer a prisoner of other people's flaws. You become a free person, steady and untouchable. So remember, this anger shrinks your world to the size of your ego, but empathy expands it to the size of humanity. We've explored how perception, detachment, self-worth, and empathy form the foundation for freedom from anger. But all of these insights remain only ideas unless they are backed by practice. This is where discipline comes in. If you want to live unbothered, if you want to remain steady, no matter who you encounter, you must train your mind consistently. Because the truth is, the human mind does not naturally default to peace. It defaults to survival. It scans for threats, it reacts to offense, it defends itself against criticism. Left untrained, the mind will always pull you into anger. Discipline is the process of rewiring that reflex until calmness becomes the habit, not irritation. Think about it like physical strength. You can't walk into a gym once, lift a weight, and declare yourself strong for life. Strength comes from repetition, from showing up day after day, from training muscles until they can withstand greater resistance. In the same way, mental strength doesn't come from reading one book or hearing one lecture. It comes from daily repetition, training your mind to pause, to detach, to see clearly, to choose peace. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes. Eventually, calmness is not something you try to summon, it's simply who you are. This training starts with mindfulness, the deliberate act of noticing what is happening within you. When someone says something offensive, your heart races, your chest tightens, your mind floods with thoughts. Instead of being swept away, you learn to observe it. You say to yourself, I feel anger rising. I feel the urge to react. And just that observation creates space. That awareness interrupts the automatic chain of reaction. Over time, your awareness becomes sharper, and the gap between stimulus and response widens. You begin to recognize triggers before they control you. You begin to master your inner landscape. Meditation is one of the most powerful tools for this training. It's not about escaping the world or silencing every thought. It's about strengthening the muscle of attention. When you sit in stillness, focusing on your breath or a single point, your mind will wander. That wandering is practice. Every time you bring it back, you're teaching yourself to return to the present moment instead of being hijacked by thoughts or emotions. That discipline, repeated over weeks and months, spills into daily life. Suddenly, when someone disrespects you, instead of spiraling into anger, you can pull yourself back with the same steadiness you practiced in silence. But mindfulness doesn't have to be confined to meditation. It can be woven into the small rhythms of your day. While eating, you pay attention to each bite. While walking, you notice the ground beneath your feet. While listening, you focus fully without planning your response. These practices sharpen your attention so that you are no longer enslaved by impulses. And the more present you become, the harder it is for anger to sneak in unnoticed. Another discipline is conscious reflection. At the end of each day, ask yourself, when did I lose my calm? When did I react instead of respond? What can I learn from that? Reflection is not about guilt, it's about growth. By reviewing your actions, you see patterns. Maybe you notice that certain people trigger you more than others. Maybe you realize that fatigue makes you more irritable. Maybe you see that certain environments drain your patience. This awareness allows you to prepare to strengthen yourself in those specific areas. It's like an athlete reviewing their performance to sharpen their game. Consistency is the key here. You cannot wait for big moments of anger to start practicing discipline. You have to train in the small moments. The long line at the store, the delayed message, the minor inconvenience. If you can master your calm in the little irritations, you will be ready when bigger storms come. If you neglect the small moments, the big ones will overwhelm you. Discipline is built in the ordinary so that it protects you in the extraordinary. Philosophically, this is the difference between living reactively and living intentionally. A reactive life is one where your mood is dictated by the world. Someone praises you, you feel good. Someone criticizes you, you feel bad. Someone respects you, you feel strong. Someone disrespects you, you feel weak. You are like a leaf blown by the wind, constantly tossed by external forces. An intentional life, however, is rooted. It doesn't ignore the winds, but it refuses to be carried away by them. It is grounded in discipline, in the deliberate choice to master your inner world regardless of what the outer world does. There is also a moral strength in discipline. To live without discipline is to give your worst impulses free rein, but to live with discipline is to choose the higher self over the lower self again and again. It is to rise above the primitive urge to lash out and instead embody patience, wisdom, and composure. This is not just good for you, it is good for everyone around you. Your discipline becomes a gift. Your calm presence stabilizes others. Your ability to resist anger prevents unnecessary conflict. Your self-control creates an atmosphere of peace that others benefit from. And here's the paradox. Discipline, which at first feels like effort, eventually becomes freedom. At first, it takes energy to pause, to breathe, to reflect. It feels like restraint. But with practice, it becomes effortless. Calmness becomes natural. Peace becomes your baseline. And at that point, you are no longer restraining yourself. You are simply free, free from being controlled by others, free from being disturbed by every irritation, free from the cycle of anger that enslaves so many people. This is why discipline is not optional, it is essential. Without it, all the wisdom in the world remains unused. Without it, you'll know the theory, but fail in the moment. But with discipline, knowledge becomes action, action becomes habit, and habit becomes character. You transform not by what you know, but by what you consistently practice. So remember this, you cannot stop people from being difficult, but you can train yourself to remain unshaken. You cannot control the storms of life, but you can control the roots you grow. And you cannot erase the triggers of anger, but you can discipline your mind until anger no longer rules you. At the end of the day, freedom from anger is not a gift that life gives you. It is a discipline you give yourself. And once you give it, you'll discover the deepest power of all, the power to remain unbothered in a world that thrives on provocation.